In this PowerPoint, I'm going to go over some of the key points in your assigned readings. So I'm going to talk about the key points of affordance, visibility, and mapping. But this PowerPoint doesn't cover all the material in your readings, so you must still complete your readings on your own time. All right, let's get started with affordance. Affordance is what a user can do with an object based on the user's capabilities. Okay, so there's a few key things you need to look at here. So it's what a user can do with the object based on the user's capabilities. Okay, so this means that affordance is not a property of an object. It's not like a physical object or a user interface. Okay, so an affordance is actually defined in the relation between the user and the object. So it's not something physical, but rather it's sort of like the relationship between the user and the object. Okay, so a door affords opening if you can reach the handle. Okay, again, I go back to the user's capabilities here. So for a child, the door does not afford opening if he and she cannot reach the handle. So affordance is really the action possibility in the relation between the user and an object. So affordances are everywhere. It started out with psychologist James Gibson that came up with the term affordance all the way back in 1977, and he used it to refer to all action possibilities with an object based on users' physical capabilities. So very much like the previous definition we looked at. Okay, for example, a chair affords sitting on, a chair can afford standing on, and a chair can afford throwing. Okay. Next, Don Norman in '88 introduced the term to the design community. So affordance, its terminology in design is made useful by Don. He modified the meaning slightly to make it more usable by designers. He defined affordances as perceivable action possibilities. Okay, meaning only actions which users consider possible. So, which means that designers must create objects, affordances, to conform to the user's needs based on the user's physical and perceptual capabilities. Because when it comes to human-computer interface design, you're not thinking so much about physical capabilities only, although it's still there, but you're also thinking about perceptual capabilities. Okay, and not only capabilities, but capabilities, goals, and also past experiences. Okay, so clear affordances are definitely vital to usability of an interface. Users will map the possibilities of what an object does according to their conceptual model of what it should do. So in your readings, we talk about mental models, conceptual models. So think about that. So the users are going to map what the object does according to what they believe it should do. Okay, for example, inserting the fingers into the two scissor holes to cut things. Okay, that's an example of affordance. Those two scissor holes gives you the affordance to use that scissors. The next term I like to talk about is signifiers. Okay, so Don Norman also introduced the term signifier. A signifier is some sort of perceivable cue about the affordance. Okay. He introduced this term to make a distinction between the signal and affordance. The signal and affordance might provide to a person, which is entirely in the perceptible part of the affordance and the actual affordance itself. So it's sort of like just the perceived affordance, okay? So when you see, a button on a web page, it's not an actual button. It's but you believe that you could click it so it will go down. So that is perceived affordance. Okay, it's not an actual affordance, right? So that's a signifier. Signifiers can exist on their own, just like affordances can exist without any signifier. So the signifier part of an affordance might actually be invisible or misleading. Design is really concerned with these signifiers. Okay, so when the distinction between the signifier and the affordance was introduced, they became two distinct components. It became clear that much of the design really has nothing to do with the actual affordances when it comes to designing for the screen, but it has more to do with signifiers. Even given a physical example, for example, a painted zebra stripe, like a crosswalk, on the side of the road is a signifier, is a signal that tells you where to walk and tells you where it's safe to walk. But really, you can just walk anywhere on the road, right? There's nothing physically preventing you from doing that. There's no affordances, no physical affordances stopping you. However, by the side of the road, a fence by the side of the road would stop you since it has physical affordance, right? But most oftentimes, signifiers are used instead of the actual physical affordances, especially when it comes to digital design. So let's take a look at three types of affordances. William Gaver, another designer, defined three types of affordances. There's perceptible affordance. So perceptual characteristics of the object itself indicate what action possibilities are available and desired, like a door handle. So these obvious properties prompt the users to use the affordance in an intended way. There's hidden ones. In user interface, without obvious affordances, users often have to rely on experience or trial and error to determine possible actions. For example, they may hover or click on what they think might be a drop-down menu, so these affordances might be hidden. There's also false affordances. An object's characteristics suggest users can do something that they can't. For example, we often think that underlined text on a website is a hyperlink, so you can click on it. But sometimes you can't, so that's a false affordance. In 2001, HCI expert Rex Hartson defined 4 more additional types of affordances as a physical. So the perceptual characteristics show users what to do, like a large, highly visible add to cart button. So whenever text appears on affordances, such as buttons, they're called explicit affordances. There's also cognitive, where design features that help users notice or know about things. So very clearly labeled text to announce what will happen if users press a certain key. There's also sensory affordances, where design features help users sense something, like a ping feedback to indicate an available update. Okay, so functional is the 4th one. Design features that help users achieve goals, such as when an item appears in a shopping cart after user clicks add item to cart, right? So functional when something actually happens. All right, so 2 more in UI design, and there's pattern. You follow conventions to prompt users to take actions. So hamburger icons indicate menus. So like on your phone, you have those 3 lines. You click on it, you expect the drop-down menu to show up. There's also negative. You can block users from proceeding towards a goal when they must provide more data, like a grayed out create account or grayed out next means they haven't, done what they need to do yet, so they can't click on it yet. All right, next let's take a look at visibility. So the visibility of system status refers to how well the state of the system is conveyed to its users. So ideally, the system should always keep users informed about what's going on through appropriate feedback within reasonable time. So not only feedback, but you also need to provide it within reasonable time. So the visibility of system status is all about leveraging the use of clear communication and transparency in order to build trust and provide a great experience for your users. So you don't want to hide things from them. You want to give as much information as possible, but mind you, not too much, because too much information, it's overwhelming and distracting. So I talked about important and timely feedback. So when a user interacts with a website or app, the most important thing they need to know is that whether their actions was recognized. So a physical example would be, if you were to take an elevator up to your office or your school or your apartment, what if the buttons that you pressed didn't immediately light up after you pressed it? You'd be left wondering, is this elevator broken? Is it working? Did I press the right button? Am I moving? Am I going to go there, right? Did the elevator understand where I need to go? Okay, so that's why important and timely feedback is important. So not only should that button light up, it should light up right away, not 2 minutes later, right? Visual feedback. In digital design, visual feedback can exist in the form of color or state changes or progress indicators. This shows the user that the system is working and reduces uncertainty and anxiety about the action, like especially when you're making a purchase online. Did it send? Is it working? Am I waiting for it to go through, right? We have, we might be anxious about it, we might be uncertain about it. So here, visual feedback is definitely very important. Where you are and where you can go. Nobody likes to feel lost, so it's important to have visual cues of where you are. Okay, so no one likes to feel lost, even in the real world or online. So this leads us to another system status that falls under this usability principle, visibility. So when you're navigating a site or an app, the user should always be informed where they are on the site. You can achieve this using highlighted menu labels or using breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs help users understand their location by showing them how they arrived at the current page and can even lead them to other relevant pages. So not only are you showing where they are, you can also show them where they can go. Okay, so to summarize visibility, the visibility of a system status really encourages open and continuous communication to enable a smoother experience for the user. So why is this important? It's important because just smooth experience is important. It applies to our relationship with devices, just like it applies to our relationships with other people. We want to know what is happening. We want to know where we're going, where we are, what is happening. Okay, we expect that in the real world, and we expect that when we're interacting with our devices. All right, so the final topic I'd like to cover in this PowerPoint video is mapping. So we start out looking at natural mapping. The assigned reading looks at natural mapping. Natural mapping occurs when controls or information visually relate to the objects that they affect or represent. Okay, so visually relates, that visual relation. So the example always used when we talk about mapping is the arrangement of knobs on the stove, right? So example of poor mapping, when the mapping isn't good, is if the arrangement of knobs on a stove doesn't correspond to the way the stove heaters or rings are arranged. So it makes it very difficult to know intuitively which knob controls which heater. You have to always read it or check it to make sure it's working. So good mapping with natural mapping would make it clear which knob controls which heater, right? So you need to have good mapping so that the user doesn't need to think and check and read. It could just intuitively click the right one that makes sense, right? So the button on the right should be, the heater on the right. the one on the left should be the heater on the left, and it should also could have a diagram where it shows, you know, which burner it's heating up. I think your reading goes over this example as well. Your reading also goes on to talk about 3 different kinds of mapping. There's layout, where it talks about the stove, and the stove has that little picture, and it should really map to the correct burner. There's behavioral, which is, you know, if you turn your steering wheel right in your car should turn right. If you turn it left, it should turn left, right? If you click your button down in your car for the window, then your window should roll down. If you click it up, then it should go up. And then also meaning, where red should mean stop and action. So red should be, you know, a red button usually should mean stop, or green should mean go, because we have these associated meanings in our minds, which brings us to mental models. Okay. But that would be the next slide. But first I want to talk about how mapping also affects digital interfaces. So I've only talked about physical things. Now, natural mapping is not just confined to the physical products. Digital interfaces relate to physical things as well, to the context rooted in reality. So, and this is where I'm going to start talking about our mental model. Okay, so an example of natural mapping is the address block for shipping information. So for example, when you're making a purchase online, at some point maybe you have to enter your address, right, in the shipping information. And usually you get a form and you fill out your address. And the elements usually move from small to big. Usually you ask for your apartment number, then street number, and then it asks you for your city, and then it asks you for your province, and then it asks you for your country. Okay, so you can see that it's going from granular, like small, to bigger, bigger, bigger. And if you think about it in terms of your mental model of how you see things, it's as if someone's zooming out of a map, right? So smaller, which apartment, which street, which city, which country, which province, which country, right? As if you're zooming out of a map. So this map has this virtual map that we have in our heads. This mapping has shaped our mental model of how addresses should be structured, because we go small to big, right? So if the order of these fields is changed, it's really going to mess us up. The interface does not allow or follow a natural mapping anymore. It doesn't follow the mental model that we have in our heads, and it's really going to cause irritation and disruption in the way that we fill out forms and cause error. Okay, so this is an example of how we need to follow natural mapping. Okay, the way we think, and need to follow our mental model, which is how we see the world, how we understand information. So this brings us to the end of our slideshow here. Don't forget to go on and finish your assigned readings. By no means does this PowerPoint cover everything that you need to know from your assigned readings, but I just wanted to go over some of the key points, and then also add some other new information that relates all your readings to the digital realm of design. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the PowerPoint, and I hope you enjoy your readings as well. We will be using this material for our class activities in the next class.